Hello there, we're back with episode 5 of The Tyre Kickers. It's the classic car podcast by two people with nothing better to do than look at old cars on the internet. My name is Matt.
Hello, and I'm Max. This episode, Matt wants a Merc. So let's find him some classy old cruisers, but maybe ones that didn't used to be airport taxis.
Also in this episode, we ask what were the best film cars of all time. We're on the hunt to find the best movie motors here, not the Chitty Chitty ones.
And on See It Want It, let's worship at the feet of the Gallic goddess as we take a lustful look at the gorgeous flowing lines, bouncy suspension and swivelling headlights of the Citroën DS. Is it the coolest classic to ever waft about on four wheels? We or none?
So with all of that to consider, let's prise off the crook lock, squirt on a bit of damp start and cross our fingers as we try to fire up episode 5 of The Tyre Kickers. So after a little bit of a break for holidays, we're back. Well, holiday singular, I should say, as some of us have been stuck here. But Max, where have you been and what have you seen?
The fact you're asking that question means you haven't read my essay, What I Did on My Holiday. Clearly, it's gone unread. Palm Springs and McCormick's Classic Car Auction. Now, this is one of those American auctions that has this great atmosphere. And you know, the auctions in the UK are quite sedate and polite. Well, in the US, people are paid to run around and scream and shout and point. But there is a lot of different stock in the desert in California. Lots and lots of pagodas, cheap pagodas, which I noticed. Lots of cheap R107 Mercs. A couple of Lincoln Continentals, you know, like the one that Kennedy got shot in, that model. They look amazing. There was a particularly ropey TR7 that people were avoiding, apart from me, and lots of Corvette Stingrays. There's some really good stuff in the States.
Did you manage to keep your hands in your pockets? I know you like an auction, you get a little bit twitchy. Although you do, saying that, you do need to do 2 years of research, don't you, before you can...
Yeah, exactly. I'll go back there in 2026 and start making a bid after I've done the research. I tell you, the other thing I went to is in Los Angeles, and I thought you would have been to this, actually. The Peterson Museum in LA, which is probably the biggest car museum in the States. And I went downstairs into the vault. You have to pay extra to go into the vault, but that's all the stuff where they keep all the stuff that they don't normally display. Things like Saddam Hussein's Grosser Mercedes, President Roosevelt's 1942 Lincoln Custom, Steve McQueen's 911 930 Turbo. There was such great stuff in there. I could have spent weeks in there. I mean, I spent about a morning as it was, but I thoroughly recommend the Peterson Museum in LA. And also this week, you've been out a fair bit, haven't you? Because you've got the car out finally.
Well, yeah, although the weather has, on the whole, been fairly crap. There was one day where we thought, here we go, here's spring. Cars coming out of storage. Had a really nice day with it. Went to the pub, went and parked it up and had a coffee with a mate, and just people were chatting. You know, the thing we say about old cars, get people chatting. It was really nice. It felt, hello, you know, we're out of the gloom. And then it's just chucked it down for the next week afterwards. So there was a little bit of a respite. I managed to sort of pull it out and do a bit of swearing on it. My first taking apart and swearing stuff of this year. I've actually got a bad back actually after kind of. Have you ever tried to work on 60s cars? They're absolute nightmare, aren't they? Because you can never get in the right sort of position to do anything. So I got twisted and bent over and hunched and whatever. So I've got the classic car fixing backache the day afterwards. But I managed to do a few bits, but I got to that point yesterday where I took a few things apart and then thought, oh, bugger, I've taken too many things apart. Because it's like a big jigsaw, isn't it? And then the things that you want to do, the 3 bits you want to actually take apart, because I was doing some trim, I was putting some carpet in. And I thought that'd be easy, screws out, put that in. But then you have to take the next bit apart, don't you? And the other bit behind it takes part. And then the seat's in the way, so you've got to move that out of the way. And then before you know it, you're in sort of 15 stages that you didn't really want to be in. So there was a moment I stood back and went, oh, what have I done? I should have just left this, gone out in it.
Since we were last on, there's been lots of great listener feedback. So thank you for that. And we got a write-up in Classic Car Weekly as well.
Yeah, that was nice. So thank you, Classic Car Weekly, for giving us a plug. Also, loads of great input from our Instagram and Facebook pages. So here are a few honourable mentions. We'll start with at T and Tappets on Instagram. He says, as a bit of an automotive podcast addict, I have to say, really enjoying your work. Thank you.
Henry from Universal Classic Cars says, just listened to the first episode, enjoyed it very much.
Another positive comment from someone in the classic car game comes from William Haynes Cars. William does beautiful restos on old Jags. You've had a look at those, Max, haven't you? They're really, really nice. Yeah. He says, really enjoying your podcast. Such good company while I'm towing E-types up and down the country. Keep it up.
Dylan Edwards on Facebook says, great stuff, Max and Matt. He obviously just means Max. I'm a new subscriber as a result.
Chris N sent a message to say, just listen to the podcast, brilliant. And he said after our Capri feature, he asked, so whatever happened to vinyl roofs? Very good question. Who thought they were a good idea, he says, and what was the point of them? I lost mine in Woburn Safari Park. The monkeys stripped it off. Nice to see monkeys with taste.
I think the point of a vinyl roof was to hide the rust, wasn't it? That was the only reason of putting it on. TR Tony from Ari the Stag YouTube channel posted on Facebook to say, just listen to episode 4. Great job, well done. Happy to guest at any time to talk about the stag. Yeah, we'll get you on. We both like stags.
Christopher Curtis on Facebook mentions our feature, extolling the virtues of the excellent Dolomite Sprint. He says, enjoyed the podcast and you're spot on about the Dolly Sprint. Oh, hold on a minute. It does go on to say, though, Max. By the way, you said in the last episode that Michelotti designed the TR6. Well, you said that. He didn't. It was Carmen in Germany.
He's right, actually. I was so keen to get talking about the TR7. I forgot about the Carmen TR6 rebody. And actually, I was looking at the Carmen TR6s. I never used to like them, but they are appealing to me a bit more. I don't know what it is. I quite like the TR6 now.
Got another one from Complaints and Correction Corner as well. Keith D'Souza from Classic Car Weekly says, I just wanted to point out a small error in episode 2 with regards to famous classic police cars. He says, it was mentioned that the plate glass smash for the opening credits of The Professionals was a Ford Granada. However, this was in fact a Mark I Ford Consul. Who said that? Oh, you did.
I think it might have been me, but that's very impressive because I went back to the titles of The Professional.
You did.
That shot is on for a second. Now, if you can tell the difference between a Granada and a Consul in a second, I'm impressed. Because the Consul didn't used to have a rev counter, and I don't think it had an oil pressure gauge, and the Granada did. But I don't know how you can tell that from the outside, but good nerding.
You are getting slightly Anoraks now. You've lost me. He does say, actually, that's just a small thing. Hope you don't mind me mentioning it. And he goes on to say, great to have discovered this podcast. Thank you.
Got another long-distance listener, this time New South Wales in Australia. Hello, Simon, and thanks for your message. Simon's got an old VW. Unusual for an Aussie. Don't think he lives in this one, though.
Next up, special thanks to Paul Cowland from Classic Car Salvage Hunters and also Manor Park Classics. Thank you, Paul, for all the positive comments and shares online. He's invited us, Max, to the next auction at Manor Park Classics. We should go.
Yeah, definitely. I like those auctions. I've been there a couple of times. Another one came in from Utopia Restorations on Instagram. Invited us both to drop in on his workshop. It's going to be handy for Porsches, I think.
Max mentioned a long-distance listener there. Are you a long-distance listener? So far, we've been listened to, get this, Max, in the US, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, Spain, Barbados. You haven't been there on holiday, have you? Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa. Doesn't matter whether you're in the UK or abroad, but the further you are, the more interesting it makes it. So drop us a line.
So, newsflash. Matt wants a new car. This has been building for a while, but in the past few days, there's been a flurry of shabby W114s, W115s, and W123 Mercedes on WhatsApp from Matt. This can only mean one thing. He's opening an over 25s nightclub in Basildon and needs the right wheels. Matthew, an old Mercedes. So what is going on?
Well, you remember we did the See It, Want It on the Pagoda, and both of us came away with the thought that they're way too expensive. They're out of the budget for both of us. So we sort of part that to one side. But we did start talking about how you can get the look for less by going to a sort of similar era, sort of 60s, 70s Mercedes saloon and get the same sort of stuff, the same design language, same interior, that sort of stuff. You get the coolness, but at a much lower thing. So that set me going, and we looked at a couple of examples of things, and I thought, okay. And then I saw someone driving in a saloon classic. Now, I've got a convertible classic, so mine's used for high days and holidays, really. And if it's a bit chilly, you don't really want to be tooling around in it. So I saw somebody come past me in a saloon car, and I thought, actually, I need an old classic like an old Merc. And so that gets you going, doesn't it? And then you start looking on the internet, and then you see the prices, and you start looking at saloons like the 114s and 115s are not that expensive. So you start thinking, old Merc, I could maybe use that a bit more. Blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, I'm at the dealers looking at one, and then another one, and then another one. So I kind of found one yet. I've sort of talked myself out of it. You know how you talk yourself in it and talk yourself out of it? I'm sort of on the out of it phase at the moment, but I may be just back in the in it phase when I start seeing some more.
Out of it because you did a test drive?
Yeah, and then you sort of, it's that sort of lusty thing where you think, I want it, I'll buy that one, and then you sort of cool off on it a little bit. But I still would like an old 70s Mercedes with the upright headlamps, the big old Bakelite steering wheel. But I've sort of refined what I want.
That's interesting. So first of all, you started on the W123, but you've ruled that out now. That's the 75 to 86 one.
Yeah, I think I've looked at 123s, and they are good buys. Although the prices of those they're asking, especially the coupes, are quite strong. But while that interior seems to work well in a 107, the 70s and 80s Mercedes SL, I think in a 123 that sort of era of interior just doesn't feel wow enough for me. The styling's not wow enough. It's that sort of 80s. I know there were sort of 70s cars, but it just feels a bit 80s to me. So it's not my thing. Whereas you go back 10 years and you're into a lot older car, aren't you? Essentially, you're buying a 71 or 72 Mercedes saloon. It was designed in the late 60s. So it does feel older. It does feel. I did test drive one, and it was like sat in the Silver Cross pram, with the seats. You get in the seats and they're just bouncy with this big old steering wheel. My test drive wasn't massively successful. I got halfway up a country lane before the track rod end fell out of the front steering. So I had to promptly return it. So I don't really know what it drives like on a main road.
Well, you know what it drives like without track rod ends, won't you? Which is pretty badly, I'm guessing. So you had to turn around and take it back. So did you even get a mile?
No, half a mile up a bumpy track in the rain. It wasn't it wasn't my best test drive, I've got to say. So I've yet to do it. I think I've sort of narrowed down what I'm after, and I think they are interesting. That the 70s Mercedes saloons are sort of overlooked in the same way that the 123s are overlooked. Both of those are really good, solid cars. I mean, you look at the saloons; they were taxis. They did run for miles. I mean, there's a famous Greek one, isn't there? That I think of the 114s and 115s. There's a famous Greek one that did 2 million miles. I think it's in the Mercedes museum in Germany. Did 2 million miles in this car. So they should be good to go around the clock once or twice. But there's something about the 70s. They are uber cool if they're in the right colour.
Right, to the internet. Let's have a look at some examples. Here's one, a 1969 W114 250 saloon. Now, either this has been lowered or Kate Middleton took the photographs, because it's looking very, very wrong to me.
Yeah, well, it's just someone who's just still learning Photoshop. And what's doing. I think this one has been lowered, but look at the colour. We're looking at a light blue 1969 114, so one of the very, very early ones. And because this is down the lower end, it has been lowered, which is generally what happens. The lower end of the price thing gets into the hands of people who start. I don't know what that look is. Where's that look from? Is that from the States or somewhere? That the Mercedes where they're barely sort of just scraping the tarmac as they drive along. It's not.
Well, that's the lowrider look, but I don't recall them doing that to Mercedes that much. It just looks terrible, to be honest. And also, it's the column gear change, which is a bit of a faff. I mean, I'm not a fan. I like the look of it. I'm not a fan of this one. It's got the American headlights, it's left-hand drive. I mean, it is cheap, but it's cheap for a reason, isn't it? Let's move on to another 1969 one, a W114 230. Now, this is in a nice dark blue colour, and it's a South African import, which is interesting because lots of these I've seen have come from South Africa. I think they used to make them over there. This is a 4-speed manual, nautical blue. I don't think you want a manual, though, do you?
No, having looked at it, I mean, a manual, I think if you were going to pick it up for peanuts, I think these cars are sort of between 5 and 7. Let's mention that. I mean, the last one that went to auction finished up at 5, so you put the hammer price on top of that, and you're about sort of 6. And a little bit of fettling, you'd be rolling around at sort of about 6,000-7,000. So that's worth doing. Could you live with a manual for that money? I think you could, but the prices are the thing that attracted me. I mean, this one we're looking at is 12 grand. The one before we were talking about is sort of 5-6. There are the 5 to 10 ones around if you can find them, usually at auction. So you've got to take a punt on that, but that's what makes it interesting, I think. I think once you start looking at not even the concours ones, but the ones that are being presented as perfect. So, I mean, there was one I looked at in a dealer that was 25. Now, that was a coupe, and the coupes do sort of command a bit more money. Coupes seem to start sort of like 16, 17 upwards. The one that I saw that was the coupe, beautiful paint job. I think I've got it here actually. You can on your screen now if you have a look.
Okay, is this the white one, the 280C
yes,
2.8 W114? That's 25,000.
I mean, this is a beautiful car. Yeah, beautiful car. It's had a beautiful.
You've suddenly gone from 5,000 to 25,000. You didn't stop
Yeah, but
anywhere
this
in
is what
between.
happens,
You've just
isn't
gone
it?
straight to the maximum.
And in the flesh, it's really nice. I haven't driven it, but I've seen the paint job on it, and it's really, really nice. The provenance of it's fantastic. You know, the book of bills and receipts and original service book and all that sort of stuff. It just ticks all the boxes. So, but then you've leapt, 4 or 5 times what you were going to pay. I think
that is a really good car. I'm just going to explain this car, just how good this is. So it's white with the blue interior, the MB Tex interior. It's the pillarless coupe of the W114, so it's the really stylish one. I always thought the W123 coupe was a bit ugly, but this one is super stylish. I mean, this is gorgeous. I would recommend you put down the microphone and go and buy this immediately.
Well, yeah, just need the 3 numbers off the back of your card if that's all right.
The expiry date, some time ago.
I'm going to say something controversial here. I don't think the coupe is the nicer car. I think the saloon is in the right colour. Has
I disagree
got more of a wow. No,
I really like the coupe.
I hear what you're saying, but you're wrong. These ones are they're Paul Bratt cars, aren't they? And the coupe just sort of, if you see one in the flesh, it looks like they've sort of rushed the back, and gone, oh yeah, just thingy it there, that'll be fine. It doesn't have that flowing lines. I'm going to upset a lot of coupe owners, but to me, in my eyes, the coupe's just a little bit ugly from the back.
I can see where you're coming from, because the saloon has got very good proportions, but I've seen a couple of these coupes in London recently, and they do look uber cool. They look menacing, actually, because it's got that boot that's so big you could hide dead bodies in it, because it does have that slight whiff of menace, and that's why I like these coupes. I think white isn't probably the right colour for it because it doesn't show the lines, but the darker colour, if that was in the blue, the blue interior, you'd be fighting me to get that. I think they're great looking cars. I
mean, they are beautiful. When you get there and you see them in the flesh, and the coupe does actually work as a vehicle. I just don't like the back 3/4 of it personally, but I think if you come back to the original sort of see it, want it, lust of this, and this is where it starts, and we talked about this with the Silver Shadows a couple of episodes back, is it starts from a point of view going, wow, they're cheap. Oh, that would be good. Do you know what? And then I could, I don't need to use it all the time because it does. And you start justifying it, don't you? When you're up to a £25,000 car, you start going, what am I going to get rid of?
Yeah.
In lieu of it, because I can't park that in a storage place and not use it. Whereas, I don't know. I just think I think if I could find the right saloon car with auto, with power steering, and it's under 10 grand, that is in the wheeler dealer language, that's a lot of car, isn't it? A lot of car for the money.
I know exactly where you are, because it's like, the 10 stages of grief. Well, it's the 10 stages of buying a classic car. And at the moment, you've started off, wow, these are cheap. Now you're at 25,000. You're thinking, can I manage to not feed the kids this week and just buy this instead? Because you get quite obsessed by them. But I know what you mean about the saloon. I think they're really good value. I think if you buy one, I'll be your first fare on the way to the Flughafen.
You're on. There's no chatting and no being sick, because there is a clean-up charge. Next up, time for our latest See It, Want It. That feeling you get when you catch a car out of the corner of your eye and start plotting how to get it in your garage, a bit like me and the Mercedes.
So this episode, I caught one in the classifieds last week and have become obsessed about La Voiture, possibly the most radical mass-market car design of the 20th century. I'm not talking about the Mini or the Beetle, but the Citroën DS.
Ah, the Goddess, yes, revolutionary at launch in 1955. But is it a good choice as a classic? Some say it's complex, full of hydraulics, and not especially quick. So is it too high risk to stick on your drive?
Gently leaking hydraulic fluid. Also, is it too expensive? Asking prices are pretty high these days, so let's look at a few and then consider some smooth riding, cosseting classic alternatives from Crew, Solihull, and the DS's own successor. Okay, let's start with the ultimate Goddess. Let's have a look at this. I'm going to go straight to the internet for this Citroën DS23 1973 Palace. It's in grey, it's gorgeous. Is there possibly a nicer looking classic car? Answer, no.
So is this what's triggered it? Where has this come from, this lust? Is it finding this one or another one on the internet?
Oh, it's just the usual madness. I think I stumbled across one which was brown with a brown interior, and then it started me thinking, oh, look there, £20,000, and suddenly this one in front of us is now £40,000. But I do love a DS. I did borrow one a couple of years ago from somebody for a classic car day, and it was the 19, so it was a very early one. but it just rode so beautifully. This thing was just a dream to drive. Very slow. I mean, the engine was a throwback to the traction avant, I think. So the engine is pretty weedy in all of them, and they are pretty slow. They did get fuel injection, I think, later on. But then you're there to enjoy the French countryside, and so you cruise along looking cool. It's a great driving car. They're so different to drive than a normal driving experience. You just think, wow, they've reinvented the car here. Have you ever driven one?
I haven't, no, but I have. I grew up with Citroens. My parents had Citroens, so we had the sort of next evolution of this. Well, not the evolution of this, but the evolution of the technology. We had a GS that rode up and down, and you could drive it on three wheels and all that sort of stuff. So I'm familiar with the tech. But looking at this, you think this was, this first came out in the 50s, didn't it? This must have looked space age because it didn't look like anything else on the road, and it kind of still doesn't. I mean, those panels are just beautifully sculpted. They're all bolt-on, actually. I think you can take them all apart and still drive the car, can you?
I think so. You can certainly take the panels off at the back, can't you, to fix the puncture. I just think when this was released, we in Britain hadn't even built the M1. So it was so futuristic and such a good car that you didn't really have the roads for it at that point. And I think what would be the competition at the time, 1955, kind of Rover P4, Jaguar Mark 1, I suppose. Nice car, but not as advanced as this one. Austin A90. I mean, these were cars, but they weren't cars like the Citroen DS. This was truly
they
a
were
piece of the future.
Dull in comparison, weren't they?
Yeah, boring. I mean, okay, the Jaguar Mark 1 might have been a bit quicker, but it certainly didn't look like this, and it didn't feel like it. I think these are really good buy 5 years ago. Now they're really expensive, and I can't quite work out why.
One of the things with this car is first thing I would look at is where are my specialists? Because if the specialist for this is in Wolverhampton, and you live in Cornwall, it's going to be a bit of a tricky car. Whereas if you've got specialists nearby, within half an hour or something, then that's a lot easier to live with, especially with a more of a kooky car.
Yeah, I think specialists within an hour radius on a trailer would be quite good. But I do think there's a thing about this car is that people who don't like cars like Citroen DSs, and when I was driving that one around for the day a couple of years ago, it just started lots of car conversations with people who didn't like cars and weren't interested, but they came up to me and talked about this one because it looks so strange. So it is one of those classic cars that kind of crosses or leaps over the barriers into between us and normal people.
I wouldn't class you as normal, by the way.
That's what it says on my certificate. Certificate of release.
Yeah, you might want to revise your categorization. But in terms of, I think that's an interesting point though about cars. I think classic cars, the more approachable a car is, I think the more approachable people are to you. So I think as something like this, like a DS, it doesn't scream, I've got loads of money and, don't touch it. It is like, whoa, I haven't seen one of those in years. Oh, look at it. Is it the one that goes up and down? And you do, as you say, you do have those conversations. And I think that's the fun bit of classic cars, isn't it?
Nobody's going to give you road rage in that, are they? If you cut somebody up at a junction, they're just going to let you go because you'll be a French architect swanning around somewhere. I think they're a really good car, but there are alternatives as ever. And interestingly, one of the alternatives used the Citroen suspension technology from the DS, and this is the Silver Shadow Rolls-Royce. If you have a look at this one on your screen, this is a 1977 in Georgian silver for about, £9,000 less than the last DS we looked at. And you're getting the DS technology in a Rolls-Royce body. Now, do you think that's cooler than a DS or not?
You're not back onto these again. I thought we'd cured you of this Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow thing.
I've never left. I'm just permanently in Silver Shadow land.
I thought we'd reached the fruition of your 2-year research project on this, and you talked yourself out of it because they were too rusty. I think the DS is cooler than that.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's move on to another suggestion then that I've got, which is I think could be as cool as the DS, which is the Rover P5B Coupe. This is a 1971 one on your screen in dark blue.
No.
Do you not like that?
No. It looks it's a Harold Wilson government car, isn't it? I don't know. Just ugh.
But in terms of waft and ride,
still got jet
the
lag.
Rover. I think these are really good. In terms of the ride and the feel, you get a kind of DS feel wrapped in a staid Rover body. I quite like that. I'm surprised you don't actually.
No, I think that's too boring. That's too boring. The Rolls-Royce is too. We've discussed the Rolls-Royce. For $5,000, oh look at this is fun, and it's a bit Northern Comics. We said before the DS is going to be a real head turner.
Okay, so here's the final suggestion I've got, which is going back to Citroen's own catalogue, a 1986 Citroen CX. Now, this followed the DS. It's not quite as cool looking. It's a bit more modern. It's a bit more 80s. But the CX was a great car, and it was slightly faster. Do you remember they had a CX GTI as well, I think?
Yeah, these were expensive cars back in their time, and they weren't your average. You had to be on some serious dosh to buy one of these, and it was a bit of a kooky left field choice as well. I think it's probably up against a high spec Rover SD1, that kind of market. But these CXs were. It was only when you got in one you realised how big they were for the time. Big leather seats. I mean, it's very luxe, but like you say, I think it hasn't got the kind of coolness of the DS, or that it hasn't got the price. So this one's up for about €16,000, and that's if you could pick the DS up for that.
You get the looks, you get the style, you get the ride, but you're not paying 30, 40, 50,000.
Here's the question though: if you're lusting after a DS, I'm saying to you, Max, you can have this for half the price. You're going to go for it?
No, obviously not. I'm going to go for a DS. I'm going to get into horrendous debt.
Feature then, wasn't it?
I'm going to get into horrendous debt. I'm going to break the bank and go and drive a DS, because you look at the alternatives and you think that could work. However, I don't want it as much as I want that. So the DS, I think, can't be beat. I've yet to come up with an alternative that beats the DS for what it does while looking as stylish, apart from the Citroen SM.
Yeah, you're into another whole ball game there.
But then I'm selling the house.
Exactly. Well, just a warning to you, anybody out there who does have a Citroen DS or is thinking of selling one in about 2 years' time, that's when Max will be ready to buy one. So just keep it polished up, keep it serviced. He's coming for you in about 2 years' time. Okay, then moving on from James Bond's Astons to Mr. Bean's Mini. Film cars have got a strange way of burrowing into our imagination. Then 30 years later, we're looking them up in the classifieds.
So what are the best classic film cars? Now, for me, it's all about the cars that have been in the best chase sequences. But for other people, they have different reasons they like film cars. So here's our essay today, Matt. Film cars, discuss.
Well, yeah, film is a very powerful thing. You're sat in a cinema, or you're sat just concentrating on a film for 2 or 3 hours, and then these cars are sort of put at you. We should say a caveat is a lot of crap cars are in films, because a lot of people like British Leyland in the 70s managed to wheedle them into films, and also a lot of the mainstream marques have shoved cars into films to just try and get them to sell because it's a new model. For me, the more interesting ones are the kooky ones, and maybe the ones that weren't product placed. I think the ones for me that stand out, and it's quite hard. We sort of just said, let's just do 3 each, and it's quite difficult to come up with 3 each, isn't it?
I was looking basically towards the cars that have been in the best chases, because you're right, the product placement. Do you remember the BMW Z3 in a Pierce Brosnan Bond film? It just looked wrong. That's just clearly just been squeezed in the plot in order to try and sell Z3s. But I think the cars that are working for their living in films are the best. So, for example, my favourite film car is a bit left field, but it's the Mercedes 450 SEL 6.9 in Ronin. Now, there was an amazing car chase between that and a Citroen XM, I think. And that Mercedes was absolutely on its toes. If you watch that again, it's a 4-minute sequence, 5-minute sequence, and the Mercedes is just absolutely driven on the limit. Now, for me, that's what's exciting about it, because it's a standard car. It's not a silly gadget film car. Standard car being pushed to the absolute limit. And interesting, those cars are also, I think James Hunt had one of those 6.9s, and I saw one the other day in a classic car restoration shop, and it's huge. Even now, these days, it's a big car. So then it was massive, and I think that was driven so well. It's an absolute corker. And Ronin, I mean, you love Ronin. I think I love Ronin, mainly because of the car chases. It was such a good film, but that Mercedes for me stood out.
Doesn't have to be a big car to be good in the chase scene, though. If you think about the Bourne Identity, that kind of reinvented a lot of things, including the sort of classic kind of crime car. It was a Mini, wasn't it? That got thrashed about. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a big iconic car, but that one was quite an iconic car, and they still fetch good money, don't they? Those big SELs.
They do, and I think Ronin was directed by, I don't know much about movies, but I think he was directed by the bloke who directed Grand Prix. So we knew a lot about car-to-car filming, which is why probably the plot is a bit thin. But I do remember reading about that. De Niro was so scared that the director had to get his own wife in the passenger seat to do the scene before De Niro got in, because he was scared of the driving. But it's a cracking film. I mean, a bit thin on plot, but good on Mercedes.
Well, that's one from you. Let's go for one from me. I've gone for more like iconic stuff. And for me, an iconic car that maybe was made by the film, definitely made by the film, the DeLorean in Back to the Future.
But you see, I would say that's more of a gadget car. Was there a car chase in that? I can't remember. I don't think so.
Well, it did. It got away from the baddies, the Libyans, didn't it? Trying to shoot at it. But I think it was. I mean, I think that must have been a product placed car, because would it have been that memorable? Because the story of DeLorean wasn't great, was it? Would we have remembered that car, that sort of failed sports car from Belfast, if it hadn't been for Back to the Future? I mean, that is the Back to the Future car. Even people who don't know about cars can say that's a DeLorean. So that was a fantastic bit of product placement. But I think that was a film that made the car that made the film.
I've got another suggestion, another car chase. A 1971 Pontiac Le Mans from French Connection. Do you remember that? Gene Hackman driving that through the streets of New York. I mean, that's a cracking car chase.
I don't remember what that looks like.
Well, the thing is, it's a pretty boring Pontiac saloon, but the idea is that it was actually, it was destroyed during the scenes, and it's driven to absolute destruction on the edge again. So it's a dull car, but in a great role. So I kind of like that idea, that juxtaposition, that it's probably the most boring car they could find, but they made an amazing car chase out of it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I still can't imagine what it looks like.
You're not convinced, are you?
No, not really convinced.
Get to do some research. Do some research quickly. Do some tapping away and look up a Pontiac Le Mans. You won't be excited by it. It's not an exciting looking car, but it was a great car chase.
I see you, and I see it and I raise it to Mini Coopers in The Italian Job. I mean, you can't talk about a film without talking about the Minis in The Italian Job. I mean, what did that do for the sales of the Mini Cooper?
Well, it just made them iconic. And actually, the stunts they performed were fantastic. I can't think of many other cars that could do that.
Have you got another car chase one?
This is even more left field than the other two. Do you remember Condor Man?
What?
1981,
Yes,
Michael Crawford.
I think so.
Black 911s. There was a chase scene.
Terrible.
Chase. It was it's an awful film, but the chase scene. I think there were 4 911s and 1 slant nose turbo or lookalike turbo. When I was watching that as a kid, all these 911s swarming around the hero car, fantastic. Made me love 911s from that moment on.
And one more we'll just throw into the thing. If you're going to talk cars in movies, I mean, this list it could go on, for another half an hour. But if we're going to talk cars in movies, you've got to talk about Bonds. Aston Martin DB5, iconic car because of Bond. Even the lesser cars in Bond, remember the bullet-ridden 2CV from For Your Eyes Only. Every car that was in one of the classic Bonds, I mean the old cheesy ones, had a massive, massive impact. You say later on when the product placement got a little bit more knowing, I think it sort of blandized out a bit. But it was interesting in the recent film or the one before where they brought the iconic DB5 back again, because obviously the cars were getting a bit bland, weren't they? That's made a big, big impact, surely.
The DB5 is probably the film car of all time. And I'm not sure that actually anything is ever going to be better than a Bond car, because once you become a Bond car, you're a Bond car for life, and then it's a famous car, isn't it? And if you look at the values of the DB5, I don't think they would be half as much if it hadn't been driven by Sean Connery and then Daniel Craig. So I think the DB5 is probably the ultimate film car. It shuts the discussion down, doesn't it? Because you can't get better than that.
And that is the end of that discussion. Very quick run through of film cars. Have you got any other ideas in terms of film cars that would be better than Condor Man, which was Max's suggestion? Drop us a line on our socials. We're at the Tyre Kickers UK, or just search for the Tyre Kickers on Facebook. We were, I and Max about whether to do Instagram or Facebook, but people are responding on Facebook as well, so we'll have to go to double the effort to do that. Are you prepared to roll up your sleeves and do double the work in terms of social media?
As long as people watch Condor Man from the start to the end before they make a comment, that'll cut down the amount of people who want to comment to probably zero.
Yeah, drop us a comment on one of our two feeds then, Facebook or Instagram. What's your ultimate film car, or anything we talked about in this episode? Just get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
So that's enough nonsense for this episode, but please keep your comments and corrections coming. We do love to be out-nerded by sharper spotters in shinier anoraks.
And the best way to do that is to get in touch by our Instagram. As we say, we are the Tyre Kickers UK. The logo is an orange Porsche 911.
So in the next episode,
with summer around the corner, fancy cruising the continent. Let's look at the best mile eaters for the waft to the south of France. What is the ultimate car to crush those big French autoroute distances?
And there's another Marmite motor on the conveyor belt, heading for crush it or correct it. So please keep the corrections coming, and see you next time.
Perfect. Now, believe it or not, when you edit that, it actually comes out and sounds fairly normal. You cut all the crap out of it. But if you can leave a little bit of me in it, that'd be nice.
Well, we'll see. I'm terribly sorry to announce that Matt is no longer with us.
By AI.
Exactly. Or just A.